Welcome to Small Arm Solutions. Today we're really honored to have a guest here, somebody who I've looked up to forever, somebody who I've followed their career and his products for 20 years. And those of you who watch my channel know that I am probably one of the biggest LMT fans that's been out there, and it's been like that forever. And we're going to find out a little bit of that why today. We have the honor of having Karl Lewis from Lewis Machine & Tool, president of Lewis Machine & Tool, here with us to give us some interviews so he can talk about, he doesn't like talking about himself. He never likes to brag, so I always told him I do it for him. To let everybody know what he does, because a lot of you don't know a lot about Lewis Machine & Tool and exactly what they are. You know a little bit about the small arms, but you don't know the overall picture. We're going to get into that. I first met Karl when I was doing Black Rifle 2, we'll probably say 2003. I was invited by Paul Leitner Weiss to Milan, Illinois, to see a demonstration of his 499 Leitner Weiss rifle for the Coast Guard. Yeah. And lo and behold, it was Karl who was working with him on that. So when we were getting, everything was coming out, he came out with this really weird looking upper receiver that I had never seen before. It was a one-piece upper receiver, and I was pretty mesmerized by it. And then he came out with a 10.5-inch barrel that didn't even have a handguard on it. And I had never seen that before either. So we did the demonstration, and he looked at me after I shot that 10.5-inch barrel. He goes, "You're the first one to ever fire that." So that's something I still want to ask him about, if that was one of his first production 10.5 barrels or not. And that's when I learned about his MRP, and I was extremely impressed. And I asked Karl if he would send me one. At the time I was working for the Wisconsin Crime Lab. He sent me the upper receiver, 3 barrels, and a case of M855 ball, and said, "Shoot it and tell me what you think." So ever since then, I've been an LMT fan. It's very hard to get someone who's as busy as Karl to be able to make it to Houston to do a review. We sort of got lucky this year because NRA is here in Houston, and that starts tomorrow. So I was lucky to catch him when he came in to get him to myself so we could do a review. So I want to just jump in and get started again. Karl, thank you so much for being here. Greatly appreciate it.
It's an honor and a pleasure.
Well, let's just get right down to it.
Okay.
Tell us how LMT was formed. What was your background in firearms?
Yeah, so I started at Springfield Armory in 1976.
In Rock Island, where you're from.
Yeah, in Geneseo, Illinois, and worked at the Armory doing glamorous things, cleaning up after everybody at night and unwrapping parts and pieces out of military surplus, and doing some sub-assembly work and packaging. So everything from sanding M14 stocks to cleaning and tidying up the restrooms to whatever you do when you're 16 years old to have a job. And I was very thankful that working for Bob and Carol and Denny and Dave and Tom Reese, there was myself and maybe 1 or 2 other people back then, and it just kind of grew from there. And during that time period, the parts that were surplus were dwindling, and that's when we started to work at making parts, and started with very simple parts, M14 style clip guides and magazine catches and things. So then I would work at the machine shop and transferred out there and worked under a couple tool makers, and that's where I got into metalworking.
So for as far as going into business for yourself, I actually remembered, I think I was talking to Gino, that he was saying that when you saw the bolt carriers, you were said basically yourself, "Well, I can do this."
Yeah.
And that was sort of how bolt carriers, I'm trying to remember, it's been a long time since I talked to Gino about that, but I remember something along those lines.
Yeah, so that was really, during that time period, I was very fortunate that Bob Reese would ask him, could I use the equipment on the weekends or at night? And his thing was, yeah, you're welcome to do so, but if you take a setup, it's got to be put back the way it was, and everything's got, because we don't want to lose production. And the benefit would be, he said, you can screw up on your own stuff, and then you'll be better when you're working on my stuff. And so it was a good relationship. I have a lot of respect for him, and he was a very influential guy in my my career, as well as a number of other people. And so I had started making M1C and M1D mounts and things for M1 Grands and some 1911 parts. And to that point, in that time period, in the 77, 80 time period, there was a demand for building, of all things, AR-15s. And there was a tremendous amount of surplus parts, but under the demilitarization of old surplus, there was the bolt carrier group was cut. So it made demand for bolt carriers, and that's when I purchased 10 bolt carriers and went through and inspected them all and took notes and made drawings and reverse engineered it and then started making the parts and then laid out a plan to create a machine to make the cam path, because that was very difficult, and they didn't have any CNC machines back then or any money. So I built a machine to cut cam paths, and it was a tracer template type arrangement, and that's started working. And then things got busy, and as I would keep making, I'd have 2 or 3 different customers, and they'd say, where's your bolt carriers at? We need those bolt carriers. And finally they convinced me that it was time to move on from Springfield Armory and start my own business. So in 1980 I just dedicated myself to making bolt carriers and that process, and started chugging along and did that from 1980 to 1982, and then started working on bolts. Same process, took another year or so to get that done, and then just started one part at a time, kind of like the old Johnny Cash show, and did that. And so that's what launched the business, and had a tremendous amount of help. You know, as I said, Bob Reese was a very influential man in my life, and Mel Wiley, who let me sublease from him in this really nice screw machine factory. My banker later that came along, Jerry Hughes Camp, he taught me a lot, not just about, you can make a good product, but you have to have a strategy and mind your capital, and it really did a lot for me on my business abilities and mentoring me. So I just spoke with him a few days ago, and I'm very blessed to be where I'm at, and just driven to try to do things better.
Now, I can remember in the mid-'80s picking up a lower receiver from a company called Nassard, and the side of that said Pac West Arms, and it said Milan, Illinois. Mm-hmm. And something told me that has your name on it.
Yeah. So during that time period, just that natural progression of making upper receivers and then made lower receivers for a number of different companies, and made them by the tens and hundreds of thousands, but not for myself, but for them.
As OEMs.
And during that time period, another friend of mine that worked at Springfield Armory and got together and worked with different distributors, and they said, you guys should make lower receivers because that would be good. So that's when we started a company called Eagle Arms, and he ran the business side of that, and then we would work on making the component parts and making the whole assemblies. So much like the convention here in town on the NRA, one of our big breaks is that we were Camp Perry type shooters and understood that process. So we would make and enhance the M16 AR-15 family, Stoner family rifles to be target guns. And that back then, the huge break for us was we had sold the rifle, and a few months later we got a call from, I can't remember his name, it's forever ago, but he would, in the dope bag, they would buy different products blindly and do a review on them and then write the article. And so he called and said, "Man, we can't believe how good these rifles are. And in fact, we bought one and we couldn't believe how well it shot. So we bought another one just to make sure that you didn't like have G2 on us and you knew where they were going." And then that simple advertisement and endorsement really lifted that company up and gave us a lot of good sales and created, two paths for me. We had an OEM business and manufacturing, and then had a direct conduit to the commercial firearms market.
And Eagle eventually was purchased by Mark Westrom, which eventually purchased the rights to the name Armalite.
Yeah, that was quite a coup.
Yep. So there's a lineage to those of you guys who wonder about where the company Armalite had come from, which is a direct descendant from Eagle Arms.
Yeah.
Well, the next thing we want to talk about is a subject that I really, really love that most people have no clue about, is the work that you've done for SOCOM.
Sure.
And one of the, if you wouldn't mind picking that one up,
Okay.
and specifically the 10.5-inch barrel that was developed by Crane.
Yeah.
Can you please give us the story of how you came about developing that?
Yeah. So I worked with them, and they had a good start, and there was a group of guys there that are good gun plumbers. I mean, they are very purposefully oriented, and they have a need, and they create either through themselves or through others a solution. And they had been working with taking 14.5-inch rifles and paring the barrels down to get it to be more maneuverable in close quarters. And I had been working with them on a number of other projects, and they talked about the original M4 barrel on the cyclic rate, the tempo that they operate under, and probably more on their training tempo is very aggressive. So we tried multiple contours to see how we could balance weight with heat, and so that's what we did. We created a few barrels for them, and then they tried them, and they were working well, and had sold a few for testing and evaluation, and that's how we got started with making the barrels for them. Unfortunately, during that time period and under the umbrella of, which
The M4 licensing agreement, sole source with Colt.
Yep, sole source agreement with Colts and their intellectual property. Anytime you would introduce a product on that platform, you have to ask permission to Colts as the purveyor of the intellectual property if it was allowed. So during that time period, it was in the best interest of the government to continue to buy, and Colt worked and developed a little different contour for the guys in Crane and the SOCOM system, and then generated the barrel. So we had a bunch of barrel material, but we also had good customers that also wanted the same thing. So that's what we did. During that time period, we worked with Crane to commercialize the SOTMOD buttstock, which I think is still a really good product.
Still highly in demand. It's still one of the top ones used by SOCOM.
Yeah, it's a good product, and again worked hand in glove with them to take a product and a concept and commercialize it, if you would. So that's
now many claim that where this came from was the Colt ACR in concept.
Yeah, I think it absolutely did.
So there was some lineage. You took some of the good features of that, and then made it your own.
Yeah, Crane had done a good job of the original concept and designs, and then what we did is to look at the producibility and manufacturing ability to not only get that design intent for the cheek well and the battery tubes and overmolding, but with our experience, we were able to make it producible in higher volumes and at lower cost than the initial prototype runs. So
another thing I'd like to mention about this stock has been heavily used by SOCOM for many, many years, is through other militaries as well. One of the things that made this stock as popular as it was its ability to withstand drop testing. You could drop this thing any which way you can, and they didn't shatter.
Yeah.
It was just an incredibly, at Colt, for instance, they've done many tests on stocks over the years where they would do drop testing because they won't put anything at their factory on their guns without them verifying it. And they would do their own internal testing, and this stock was just basically indestructible. In fact, the only other stock that I think Colt's ever used other than this one on military contracts is the Voltor iMod.
Yeah.
And that was because they found that one was, would hold up as well. But there's a military use for these. They have to go through certain testing before they're accepted. And this stood out because being smooth here, and also the fact that it was just indestructible when you would drop it.
Yeah. It was a good design, and we just enhanced it. They did a lot of the groundwork.
And so much as it's being copied now by, was it B1? I think is making something
B1,
similar.
There's some that are very similar, and it's a good design. A little Dale Barnard, when he was in the military and going to different shows and stuff, said they had to put an adapter in here. They made an adapter for the sling swivel, and he had mentioned that to me. So then I went back and
this would be your Gen 2, correct?
Yeah,
Gen
Gen
1 didn't
2.
have that, and then the Gen 2 had the QD sockets.
so I have to give him a shameless plug. So and that took a lot of energy and work just to add that feature. But I thought it was important and gave you another capability to have an ambidextrous, quick attachable sling. So that's where that.
The rifle you see here is my personal Mark 18 SBR. As you can see, it's completely mil-spec. The only thing that's really different on this one is I have my ASR suppressor mount on there instead of using the Knights. Of course, I also put the Myad on all of my grips. I have size Sasquatch hands, and these just fit me absolutely beautiful.
Yep, that's what's good.
Okay.
And then during that time period, some of the things that we just came up with, a very simple, very utilitarian backup iron sights that co-witnessed with aim point red dot.
That was part of every Mark 18 Mod 1 is they were issued from Crane. They would come with your backup sight.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was a good package. And it was, it's a great product. There was a lot of work that went into it, and it still works well. We can debate whether 10.5 inch is the right length barrel, and it's really ammunition driven.
Yes, and again, one of the biggest things with these short barrels is the gas ports. They have to be opened up really, really wide due to the fact that you have such little time between the the gas port and the end of the muzzle. Mm-hmm. In fact, the gas port that the Crane uses, I know from working at Colt, they felt that the gas port that Crane used was too wide, and so when Colt would make their 10.5s, they would drop it down a little bit. So there was always some dispute in between the military gas port sizes plus the ones they would sell commercial overseas and whatnot.
Yeah.
But of course, when they made these for the military, they had to do them to print.
Yeah.
But their commercial ones, they had not. Okay. Another product that we want to discuss is your enhanced bolt carrier group. Now, those of you who are familiar with bolt carrier groups know that the most highly sought after bolt carrier probably in the industry right now is the LMT enhanced bolt carrier group. If you look on the industry, you'll see several what they call enhanced bolt carrier groups. Mm-hmm. Most of them will have such very, very minor changes to them. In fact, you'll find very few carriers. People have done some work on the bolts, but nobody has done the work that you have. You enhance both the bolt and the carrier. And this was at the request of SOCOM.
Yeah.
So Can you give us a little bit of the background of how this came about?
Yeah. So that the guys, SOCOM and the operators, they train very, very aggressively and in a very high tempo. So as they would do so, they would find certain components that would wear out, and so one of their requests was a longer life bolt. So that's when we did an extensive material research project and got the best material we could, and then,
which is unobtainium. That's an LMT super secret.
Super secret. And so we started with really good material, and then had to develop a very aggressive manufacturing plan to be able to make it, and so it proved out. We would do hundreds of thousands of rounds of testing just to make sure that it would last.
At the same time, Colt was having severe quality control issues with bolt breaking. Would that be around the same time that you were asked?
Yeah, but it's one of those things where this product really was to address the need of new types of ammunition that were coming into the system and just to enhance the durability of the product. So that's what was the genesis here. And then it was also not just making the bolt very, very tough, but was also to address the fact that with the shorter barrels, as you said before, you're opening up the port and the timing had changed. Then you add a sound suppressor on the end of it and it's gassy. So we looked at that and then came up with a combination to try to solve both problems, which was more reliability, more consistency in the bolt itself, as well as to change the timing of the bolt carrier group in a way that you would let more of the pressure evacuate out of the barrel and sound suppressor before the system would open. So that's really what we did with the enhanced carrier, which goes hand in glove with the bolt itself.
So with the carrier, you're changing the diameter, or changing the direction of the cam track, and you also introduce the gas a different way into the carrier as well.
Yeah, that's one of those you have to get underneath the hood to know that one. So one of the things that you'll note when you're cleaning a bolt or looking at it with a more conventional gas port system in a key is that the gas itself rushes down the gas tube through the key at an angle into the chamber where the bolt is the bolt carrier is waiting to be rotated back with the stroke of the gas that introduces. And so as that gas is coming back, it's highly charged with particulate, and of which is copper from the jacket itself. So as it would come down in that plasma type state, it would weld itself to the top of the bolt, and you would get that common copper buildup on the top of the bolt, and then it would inherently start to slow down or move the bolt around inside. So what we've done is redirected, instead of one hole, use two holes and then redirect the gas so it doesn't impinge itself on top of the bolt. And there, it's easier to clean, it lasts longer, and it doesn't disturb the cycle of the product.
Now the bolt had significant changes you did to it. You were looking at having a fully supported cartridge base.
Yes.
You're looking at the locking lugs that are
grooved a little bit to help distribute the stress.
You have stress relieved locking lugs, and you have what we refer to as the lobster tail extractor.
Exactly. So those are all things that help to spread out the load that's from the cartridge, and then also fully support the cartridge case itself to keep it from failing. If you have higher pressure, if you submerge the gun, you have a better chance of keeping the cartridge from rupturing. So it's one of those things where everybody has a varying opinion, right? The gun, the rifle itself blew up, or the rifle failed. I have a different take on that, in that the cartridge case ruptured due to excessive pressure. It's there's only so much strength in the cartridge case the way it was. By fully supporting it, you can squeak out a little extra pressure and not have the cartridge case fail.
Now the extractor was a really, really big improvement. For many reasons. One is with the cyclic rate. The cyclic rate and time increases because of gas port erosion, and that will increase your cyclic rate, which means further it's operating, more obturation there is, meaning the harder it is, the extractor has to work that much harder to pull it out.
Right.
And the extractor that you developed was designed around that, correct?
Yeah.
With the, you have a much more aggressive claw.
Yep.
You also have two springs instead of one.
Right. And that helps to make it more consistent with temperature. Don't get me wrong, the polymer that is used, or the rubber, whatever we want to say is the O-ring buffer, or the insert inside of the spring, certainly helps. But once you get into the lower temperature range of minus 40 degrees, that rubber is much harder than it is when it's at ambient temperature or at elevated temperatures. So it just helps with the overall cycling of the gun to make it more consistent.
I've had the opportunity to look at many in quote enhanced bolts over the years, bolt carriers over the years. Some make very, very minor changes. They only address, say, like one locking, say a locking lug issue, or they'll address something in the extractor. The interesting thing about this concept is you rethought the whole process.
Yeah.
And this is specifically designed to work with a 14.5 inch barrel. Was designed.
14.5, yeah. That because at that time, 14.5, 10.5 inch, 12, 11s. There's a whole gamut now from 10.5 up to 14, and that's really based off ammunition. There's a sweet spot there where you get the best kinetic energy with certain ammunitions with even just subtle changes in barrel length.
I had noticed, from testifying myself, I had put this into a 20-inch barrel at one point, flipped it on automatic, and I only got one shot off. So it's not forward compatible with all rifles. It's designed for the specific shorter barrels. Yeah. The carrier, not the bolt, but the carrier.
Correct.
The bolt can be used as an enhancement to anything.
Yes.
But to use the carrier, you want to have a 14.5 inch or below.
Works best there.
Wonderful.
Unless you have an overgas 20-inch gun, and it works great there too. I was there for a cheap plug.
Okay, wonderful.
It just all depends.
What we want to talk now, unfortunately, what we want to talk about now is the development of, which is undoubtedly LMT's flagship, is the MRP, or the Monolithic Rail Platform. This is the system that I first saw when it was in its prototype stages around the 2003 time period, which came to market probably, say, 2004. Yep. And this is something that I've said for many, many years. I consider this Generation 4 enhancement of the platform. If you look at Stoner's rifle, is the AR-15 initial, Gen 1. You look at the M16A2, would probably be your Gen 2. The next level would be the M4. And I always felt that this was Generation 4. This is what carried this platform to its next level. Because this was the first rifle that was out there where you were able to change out barrels at user level, where one of the biggest things that we look for in accuracy with these rifles is free floating. You have complete free floating. You have a full length rail, so you can mount your optics with zero retention. So you take them out, put them back on, it's going to be the same thing. You accomplished pretty much everything that we look for in enhancing an M4 carbine in here, plus the modularity. So I'd like to find out from you, where did this come from?
Well, again, it was evolving over the enablers. So during that time period, the SOCOM community would come up with some pretty novel approaches to put flashlights on. So they would take a hand grip and put duct tape around it, and then they'd have a flashlight. And they would add different things onto the platform. And during that time period, there was a number of very creative people like Mr. Reed Knight that came up with the rail system that integrated in with a standard M4 type product that gave the ability
the early RIS system.
Yeah, the early systems that would let you mount a light on or a vertical grip, and then that evolved into a laser pointer. And so in that time period, it opened up a greater capability of overmatch that we need. But there was some drawbacks in that you were continuing to come up with methods to bolt on, strap on, and we took more of a more holistic approach to go, these lasers, they're for real. The vertical grips, that's for real. The lights and other accessories that you could put on, that's for real. And the other area to look at, and what drove us there was the fact that one of the areas when adding optics or a red dot to the top of the rail segment was, I would call this, let's say, the stable part of the upper receiver and hand grip area, meaning you had real estate from about the pivot point of the lower receiver back to mount your optic. Anything forward of that, and you now encroached on a rail that wasn't timed or wasn't stable enough to make that work. And there were several people. Dick Swan had a concept.
SIR
system. There was a number out there. We just took a step back and said, we're not going to Band-Aid. We need to look at a new approach. So some of the design characteristic that we wanted was a continuous rail system and the ability to mount your optic to best get your eye box where you needed it, and you could add stability. And you'll see it even today. There's a lot of scopes that are cantilevered up because you have a big objective, you want to get the maximum magnification, or you want to get your eye box where you need it. And with a conventional upper receiver system, that's extremely difficult to do. So that was another design requirement. As you said, the ability to change a barrel rapidly without being at an armorer's level was another requirement or request that the customers were coming back for. And the ability to put a laser on the rifle and maintain the bore alignment, point of impact, point of aim, without degradation is very important, especially back in the times where night vision wasn't at the level it is today. So those were the design criteria that we worked with. And when we were at Eagle Arms, we had Frankenstein this kind of one-piece upper concept to chase after what you just talked about, which was a free-floating barrel system that would be very rigid, because at that time, and much like a standard rifle, if you sling or pull on the handguard system, your laser will be off target, and or
hot barrel, you could literally bend it.
Yeah, you'll bend the barrel so that you'll change point of impact. So we had kind of Frankenstein this thing together. And when we were discussing some things with the guys at the SOCOM, and they had said, "Oh, we really need this, this, and this," and I went, "You know what? Because back when we first looked at it, there was no shooter in Camp Perry that would pay that much money for an upper receiver made from a solid piece of material." Mm-hmm. But in this case, there was a customer, or we perceived there was a customer, and then that was the beginning of incorporating all these different things and doing the testing and creating a new, as you would say, a new generation of upper receiver to bolt on enablers in a good, reliable, robust fashion.
Now, for as far as the barrels were concerned, when I had first received this upper receiver to test, we had a 10.5-inch barrel, we had the 16-inch, and we also had a 14-inch, and these are internal piston barrels. Again, I use internal piston other than DI because, as we've talked about in the past, the term direct impingement is totally incorrect. Now, what really was fascinating is you were able to change these barrels, but also you offered different calibers.
Yeah. Yep.
So your initial was 5.56, and would you say your next one would be the 6.8 SPC?
There was a number of them. There we had the 6.8. Then there was 204 Ruger, which was really popular.
I tested one of those at one point.
Yeah, it's a great varmint cartridge, and then there's 6.8, and then next came 300 Blackout, and another cartridge that we're looking at is the 6mm arc as well. Mm-hmm. So that's going to take a little more deliberation on how we approach that.
One of the nice things, we've talked about in the past, you don't jump on these new calibers as they come out. You basically always take it, we'll wait and see approach to it. The 6mm arc looks like it's here to stay, but at this point, you still got only one manufacturer making ammunition for it. So that's probably going to hinder. It's anxious to release because it's a product that you really can't feed yet.
Yeah, exactly. There's some good calibers. Bill Alexander makes a good. His cartridge is, I think, a very fine cartridge.
Brindle.
Yeah, and it was just for us a decision on how much volume could we be able to produce, and then to be able to look at it, and but not only from the U.S. market but internationally, what kind of support would we be able to do?
You even done a small run of the 762 by 39 barrels too, if I recall.
We did a very small run of 762 by 39, and as we've talked about before, candidly, it's better to release a product that's mature and will stand up. And to be candid, we couldn't get the reliability level out of that cartridge in this wheelbase, if you would.
Yeah, that's been a problem that's plagued that caliber in this forever. Colt, in fact, they had their Colts bordered 760 by 39 back in the early 90s, and they ended up discontinuing it because the magazines, the guns were coming back, they weren't reliable, but it wasn't the fault of the gun, it was bad magazines.
Yeah. There's going to be somebody, and there's probably a few that we've looked at recently that have maybe a methodology that will be something in the future to look at. But
yeah, I've tested a lot of these magazines, and I've really found one that appears to be in good working order, and that's the one by C Products Defense. Actually, I'm sure you know who Chris Royce is.
Okay.
When he was working for SIG, he worked with them to make a reliable magazine for 762 by 39, and that's about the only one I've shot that I can say for sure I've had no problems with.
Yeah.
I even did some full auto shooting with it, but that's probably the only one that I've seen. It's just those cartridges just don't stack naturally in a way, which is why you see the ARs with the AK magazines,
right,
and they have their own set of issues just due to the fact of the height of the bolt carrier versus the way the magazine sits up for the lugs to strip it off, so it has its own unique form. And this is a part that really is interesting because you like me, we're more of a fan of the internal piston than we are of the external piston.
Sure.
But at the same time, you came out with a external piston version as well. I remember calling you up and asking you, why did you do that? And you said, because customers want it.
Right.
Which obviously was a very, very smart move, especially looking at where you're at now.
Yes.
That you don't tell the customer what they want. They come to you when they say, "I want this." Well, you don't try to convince them to buy that. Okay.
Right.
You want this? I will give you this. And that's really where this had come from.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Basically, all you're doing, you're using the same system that you have here, but you're changing out the bolt carrier. So you use your same bolt and your carrier, and you have your basic short stroke tappet piston system with a valve that you have the two positions. And I'll be the first to admit that when I got my initial rifle, which the rifle that you see here is the very first rifle I received from Karl right after his company had released Your Own Firearms in 2004. This is the exact rifle here. I have the external piston barrel in here, the 16-inch, but I also obviously had it in the with the internal piston as well. I never paid any attention to the external piston. You sent it to me. I shot a couple of rounds out of it. Yeah, it works, and put that aside, put the other barrel back into it. And I never thought much of it until Estonia. And then after Estonia, you sold that. It had military uses. When I said, you know what, I want to take a look at this,
Right.
And that's when I started doing all my testing with all the different barrels. But have you seen a lot of interest prior to Estonia? Have you seen much interest in this for any military sales at all?
A lot of it comes back to the lineage of the company or the country itself. If they're transitioning from AK, really is what it is, and coming into NATO, that piston-driven system is what drives that. So they're reluctant to use the impingement system after being a external piston system. Catching on here.
Yes.
And
that actually came from Mark Westrom.
Okay.
Mark Westrom, he was always just completely dumbfounded that people called it that. Yeah. And he was saying, there's never been a single military document that states direct impingement. Never. It's always referred to as gas operated. So where did the actual term direct impingement come from? Because it's wrong. It's direct impingement would mean that this would be a tube that would go right up against the key, and the gas would hit just the key and blow it backwards, not go into where a piston is made up between the back of the bolt and back of the carrier.
Yep.
And he said that always bothered him, and that's where he came up with internal piston, meaning the piston is in the inside of the carrier, or external, which meaning it's out in the front.
Right.
And I always thought that makes sense. That's right. That describes more so what it is, because this is a piston gun. That's a piston gun, except the pistons are located in two different locations.
Right.
So there is no impingement. You have a tube that's carrying the gas into the key, which directs it down into a expansion chamber. So that's just my rant. It's a pet peeve of mine. Just like you will never hear me say Picatinny rail either. That's the mill standard 1913 rail.
Yeah, exactly.
But we'll go back.
Yeah.
So not only do we have a rifle where we can switch barrels to a close quarter battle environment, or go to a basically any kind of street fighting with a 14.5 inch, but we also can go to a 16 inch for a little more extended, and if need be, you can even go to a 20-inch barrel. So basically, by wherever you're going to be, you can custom make this rifle at the user level to do what you want. So not only can we do that, you also can switch operating systems.
Right.
This is the only rifle today, and we're looking at almost a 20-year-old design now. This is still the only weapon today where you can switch operating systems on the weapon.
Right.
It's still to this date. So now we're looking at multiple barrel lengths, we're looking at multiple calibers, and we're looking at multiple operating systems.
Correct.
So your first iteration had 1913 rails, and of course this predates all the M-LOK.
Right.
Your next generation was referred to as the LM8, or the slick side. Can you give us a little discussion on that?
Yeah. So much like everything else, in the world, it's evolutionary. So many users wanted the capability of thinning down the hand grip area, but still maintaining the ability to mount 1913 rail wherever they would see fit. So we came up with a very simple, robust methodology where you could put the rail segments on, again, at the 3, 6, and 9 o'clock position and configure it the way you want, and then had little handguard panels on there so you could just push them in or take them out and tear them off to get the whatever length you needed to accommodate the 1913 rail. We also make a line of grenade launchers, so it was important for us when we created this was to make sure that it would continue to support a rail-mounted underslung grenade launcher. So it had to be robust.
Of course, this predates the M-LOK standardization.
M-LOK and then the key mod.
So, like many companies, like LWRC, for instance, they came up with their own ways of mounting 1913 rails,
sure,
and whatnot. Leclerc did it at Centurion Arms. They all made their own type of systems. There really was no standardization other than the 1913 rail until M-LOK became the
de facto standard.
Yeah, de facto standard.
Right.
Which leads us to our next evolution, which we see right here, which is the latest version, the MLS. And this would be your standard flagship right now. For military sales.
Yep, it's our leader that we have, that, and with the completely ambidextrous lower receiver group, that's our package. So
the next thing I want to talk about is an evolution of lower receivers.
Okay.
This was interesting because we used to always talk about this. I'd say, Karl, you have the most advanced upper receiver in the world, but you're still using a mil spec lower.
Yeah.
So that all changed due to a contract, to my understanding.
Yep. And it was...
looking right here, we have what's referred to as this is your semi-automatic Defender series.
Yep.
Of course, you had two lines. You have the Defender, which was semi-automatic only, and then Guardian, which was
full automatic.
Full auto. And this was the standard receivers that you had used since you started.
Right.
It was good. They were good, mil-spec, tough, proven.
Yep.
But now all of a sudden the industry's starting to change. Everybody's coming out with these ambidextrous ones. So you basically, you change with them.
Yeah.
So can you give us a little bit of a background on...
Yeah. for us, again, it's to look at the market needs and what people are operating under and what enhancements that we can give anybody. Whatever your need is, we're trying to provide a solution. So, and there was a device that used to wrap around from here to the backside, and you could go ahead and flick it back and forth
which will get caught on gear and snag and
there was
break
some
bolt catches.
Yep, there were some issues with that, and there were a number of other people that had bolt releases, and we looked at that and said, there has to be a better way, and broke it down into different segments, and then that's where we came up with an ambidextrous bolt catch, so you could catch and you could release.
Yes.
So it's almost like a good fishing story, but it was important to us not to have both, because it really does enhance the operational ability of the system, in that when you do a magazine change, it's kind of like being in the martial arts. You're always learning a new movement, and you're repetitively training your muscle memory. So when you watch somebody that's worked with both systems and watch a mag change with the ability to release the magazine, put another one in, and then instead of moving your left hand over to tap the bolt catch to release it, so you're in a shooting position and you put your mag in, tug to make sure it doesn't fall out, then come back over and you touch the weapon. Now you just pushed it off target, and then you put your hand back up to engage again. And with this system, you're able to extract the magazine, put the next magazine in, tug to make sure it's in, and then your trigger finger then releases the bolt carrier group while you're still in a good shooting position and still have eyes through your optic or a night vision or whatever your aiming device is, while your hand goes back to support you. So it's a very subtle thing, but it keeps eyes on target the whole time. So it's a very good benefit, and that's something we've worked through and work through the different patent things to create a patent for it and going forward. So the other features are the fire control selector switch, and then the ambidextrous magazine release.
Yeah. Anybody who's been in the military and you were left-handed, since since the system from the 60s right up until the introduction of the M16A2, you were getting hit in the face with brass. You always had to change hands. Then with the introduction of the M16A2, the only thing they really got rid of was just the getting hit in the face with brass.
Right.
And it really hasn't been until the last couple of years with the redefinition of the M4A1 where they've gone, quote, ambidextrous. And at that point, with the U.S. government now, they're going with an ambi safety, and they're going with the ambi magazine release. They're still at the same place with the catch.
Yeah.
You still have to manually hit the bolt catch from the left-hand side. So they're partially there, but they're still not quite there. And another thing that's nice about this, again, is it's a catch and release. A lot of the ones that are out there, as you know, they're only a bolt release on the right-hand side.
Right.
So, that's great all in itself, but for as far as clearing malfunctions, you also speed up your time of clearing malfunctions with having it there too right-handed.
Yeah.
Being able to, basically to hold to the side here, pull back, and then lock it open to clear a malfunction.
Right.
So even as a right-handed person, there's a benefit to that as well, having that actuation. Then of course you go to the left side. There are those of us who will eventually, like who can grab here and use that as well.
Right.
So a left or right-hand person would find benefits to this system.
Yeah. So I'm one of those left eye dominant right hand people. So I talk about strong hand, weak hand. So it works well, strong hand or weak hand, and depending on what you're trying to accomplish, it does have a benefit.
Now, when the MRP system was first developed, it was developed for, was it used more so as a military type contract, or was it more of a commercial?
Yeah, the impetus was to create a platform that would take care of the deficiencies of, as we talked about before, the entire contiguous rail, quick change barrel, the ability to have a free-floating barrel, and as Hawkins Spur would say, you got rid of the weak link in the upper of steel on aluminum thread.
I think what this all comes down to is the fact is, why are we still using this rifle after nearly 60 years? This is a perfect example of how this rifle has evolved from the initial AR-15 to where it is today.
Right.
And as you can see, there are still the basic same mechanical principles. So, I mean, if we go back to 1968 or so, the Colt M16A1, this rifle in today's standards is considered obsolete. But when we look at the MRP, we're looking at a direct, it's a descendant, but this is what's made this rifle relevant today. Why it is still in use after 60 years is the way this rifle's been able to be updated.
Yeah.
So
the fundamental ergonomics are really good.
Well, it always was. That was the M16 rifle has always had the best human engineering of any military rifle ever been out there.
Yeah.
But to go from this to a system that, a basic rifle, iron sights, battle rifle, to one that we change barrel lengths, we change barrel calibers, we change operating systems, we have the ability for a free-floated barrel, we have ambidextrous features. This is basically showing how the system has survived, is being able to evolve.
Right. Yeah, being able to mount the enablers on the rifle has had a tremendous impact on the performance of the entire package. So, but they're changing the qualifications, because the products that they had before and the probability of hit, and to be able to get qualified, they've had to change their shooting program to make it harder, because they had so many people qualifying as experts, which is rewarding for myself and our team that works on this.
As we've seen some of your recent contracts, using this caliber rifle in your platform, you've been able to take other rifles even in the same caliber and extend their ability to shoot longer range.
And that's a credit to the ammunition people. They make, with the technology of manufacturing ammunition and the consistency of the manufacturing processes, we've got some of the finest ammunition at the local store.
But you got to have that good barrel,
Yeah.
and you got to have that good trigger,
Yeah.
and you have to have the capability to take advantage of that ammunition.
Yep.
Where another rifle, again, it's the same caliber, you may have half the range.
Yeah.
Even using the same ammunition, but you're still getting that the extended range with a similar platform.
Yeah, it's evolved from a more systems approach. So we've been fortunate and blessed in many ways to be part of this evolutionary process, and we need to continue to push and evolve as we go forward.
Well, Karl, I want to talk about now the next evolution of your MRP system with the MWS, or your AR-10 type variation. So first I want to talk about is where did it come from?
Yeah. So the genesis came from an overseas customer that wanted to expand their designated marksman / sniper, counter sniper capabilities. So we worked with them. We had been notionalizing the product for some time and built it, and then created samples for them, and worked. It's kind of a true, but it's an unusual story in that we worked so much on precision, and then the question came, well, can you make it full auto? And said, yes, we could make it full auto, but that hasn't really been the energy or the impetus. And in about 2.5 weeks, we put together a Frankenstein prototype, and it shot full auto, and the cadence was good for controllability, and that went forward, and we did a number of trials with the product, and in a very fortuitous opportunity, the English government had an urgent requirement for a 7.62 by 51 designated marksman rifle, and we put in with our representative there, Greg Felton at LEI, and he organized the importation of the product, and in short order, we were able to get our bid samples in and get the bid ready, and then we made it through the first phase, which was weights and measures and the hard, easy stuff, right? And then we worked on a shoot. They did a down select with user assessment and shoot off. And when we got done, it was ourselves and HK that were the last two standing. And then it went to a bigger number of people and then we were selected as the product. So it was originally just going to be a 250 piece order, and we were very happy with that. And then by the time we started, and delivery was supremely important, and we gambled and started making the product before that time, and we were able to deliver on time. And because of that, we got another order before we even delivered the first order for another 250. So
you doubled.
We doubled, and so it was a great experience. Had a lot of input and help from the team that we had assembled back in 2009, and we have been working with the British government ever since.
And this was the L129A1.
Type classified, yeah, L129A1.
And also, this is the first Yank gun, as I understand, that they've ever had. They've never adopted any American-made firearms over there.
Yeah.
So that was sort of groundbreaking in itself.
That was very rewarding, but at the end of the day, our competition resides in our four walls. We're the ones that constrain our creativity and our ability to develop new solutions for customers. So we have to stay humble, and we have to get after it.
And also for you, as you were growing, this was one of your first times where you were competing against all the quote big boys, all the big manufacturers that were out there who were established and been out there a long time.
Right.
And when the down sled came, you beat out the competition, which certainly says a lot for the skill and the talent of your company. Yeah, it coming being so young.
Yeah, it was. It's one of those things where you win it's no different than when we started really getting into government contracting in that 2005 or 1986, 85, and we had worked our way up through various replacement part contracts for the government, and you would win one and go, oh man, that was really good. And then you would sit around like we are and say, so how much did we leave on the table? What was the other guy's bid, or how did that go? And then you'd just look at each other and go to the bathroom and get sick and go, okay, we won. Yeah. What does that mean? And that was kind of like the British order, because it was very clear from the entire time, and one of the final conversations we had was just a very simple, easy question that said, we cannot afford not to make the delivery time. Will you deliver? And I said, yes, we will deliver. And we delivered early, and because of that, we forged a good relationship with them. But good customer service.
The rifle that we have here it's sort of a representation. Mm-hmm. This is my personal rifle. This is the very first 308 rifle that I received from you. I think it was out of your first production back then.
Yeah.
The first when it was released to the commercial products. I had made a couple changes to it myself. The original rifle had tan furniture. You guys know me, my book's Black Rifle. To me, I like black rifles, so I kept black furniture on there. The barrel that came with it was a 16-inch stainless steel barrel, correct?
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing about that barrel was, in your requests, for instance, versus the U.S. M110 was, you had to use standard ball ammunition versus a specialized match type ammunition like our M110 does.
Yes.
So your accuracy was, so somebody could basically take a 7.62 Nano out of a belt, pull it out, stick it in that rifle, and you would have that precision with it.
Right.
Which is another really interesting.
As precise as M80 ball can be.
That was originally 16. I have an 18-inch barrel on here, just due to the fact that I believe that the 18-inch is probably the finest option that there is in length with today's modern ammunition.
Sure.
Over the 20-inch or anything else. Did you have any thoughts?
That's like picking out which one of your kids is your favorite, right? They all have their place. 18-inch is a great, for me, I agree with you. It's a great length because it gives you just a little bit extra, but when you add a sound suppressor on the end of it, it still keeps it within reason on what you're trying to do. And then in our assaulter type version, it's a 13.5-inch barrel. So they all have their benefits, but 18 is a good length.
And of course, they chose to put this monstrosity on here for an optic.
I think that's a beautiful
6
piece
power.
I think that's a beautiful bit of gear.
It weighs about as much as the rifle does, though.
It's got an excellent field of view.
It does.
It's got sharp optics. It's fast. And, a little side story to that was we were talking with one of the procurement heads, and just like we are, and he had shown me this optic, and I said, wow, that's really nice optic.
6 power ACOG.
Yep, 6 power ACOG. That's really nice. I said, but I think you could stretch out a little bit and have better target identification at 800 if you had 12 or 18 power scope. And he said, that's interesting. He goes, my budget is enough that I can buy 400 rifles or 200 rifles. And I said, this is one of the finest optics ever. And it is. I'm not joking. It's a good optic, but I understood he had budgetary requirements, and they had that optic available, and they had demonstrated how effective it was as far as speed of engagement and field of view. I mean, when you look through that optic, you can see a lot of battle space with it. So it accomplished, several different things, but yeah, I have a fond place in my heart for Trigicon.
So that was your L7, correct?
Yeah.
Now, the L129 or L7 predates the release of the commercial market, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So one of the interesting things about the rifle when I got it was there was no forward assist.
No.
And that tickled me because I have a particular opinion about forward assist that Gene Stoner shared as well. But let me just ask you why you chose to omit it.
Well, there's two sides of this coin. So we'll say in the past, it much like, and I think Mr. Stoner had it right, which was if you have a malfunction, it's better to clear it as quickly as possible before you take a more male approach, which is if something's stuck, you just hit it harder and then make it worse.
Yes.
Right? So by not having a forward assist, it kind of took that out of play. But we recently have created a newer model for another program that's coming out that they have a need to do their press checks with the forward assist, and their training regiment is such that they needed it. So we made some forward assist products.
But we'll be clear, that's a training issue, not a mechanical issue, not a mechanical need. It's a training need.
The customer is always right.
Another question I want to ask you is the pattern that you went with the SR25 type lower receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you had the choice of developing your own or going with something that was already out there. What was your thought process in that?
The basic AR-10 design, was the base model, and then they shrank it down to accommodate a smaller, lighter weight cartridge. So from that aspect, it was very easy just to keep duplicating what was successful.
And of course, your upper receivers will mate on, say, Knight's armament, and vice versa.
Yep, and there's a few others that have that same pattern. That's the joy about having an elongated takedown pin. It can be forward or aft a little bit to do
And
that.
your bolt carrier, which again, to my pleasure, was chrome plated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the past, you've used manganese phosphate with chrome inside,
Yep.
but you had chose to go with the chrome.
Yeah.
What was your thought process with that?
I think part of that was from a material selection and how the gun operated, and it just made sense at that time. And I think you and I spoke a little on the way here today that we're working diligently to work to reduce the amount of chrome-plated parts that we have. It's an environmental concern. It's moving forward, and so we've done are doing extensive testing with different type of surface treatments, and we'll hopefully have something that meets the requirements.
So your barrels that you initially had was they say they're 308, and you also have ones that are marked 7.62 NATO. So are all your barrels interchangeable with both? You can fire 308 and 7.62 in all of them, or do you have to? All
of our barrels will accept either types of ammunition, either 308 or 7.62 by 51 NATO.
So initially it was a 16-inch barrel, and I, again, have the preference for the 18-inch. Now you offer both stainless steel as well as chrome-plated barrels?
Yes.
And why would you keep both of those instead of just say, we'll just do stainless steel?
Again, it's really about the customer need. The chrome-plated barrels have a much longer endurance cycle. They can take a higher stress level as far as cadence of fire.
More of a combat rifle.
It's more of a combat rifle.
Versus a precision DMR.
Right. Yep.
And then you also have 20-inch. And now we have some different calibers as well.
It's kind of funny that we, where we're going with this a little bit, because we introduced and won the contract in about 2009. And in 2010, 2011, there's this cartridge that came out for long-range shooting it was like the apple of my eye. It had good cross-sectional density with the projectile. It had a nice long low BC. So we started chambering and building barrels in 6.5 Creedmoor. And I had the pleasure of talking with Jason Hornady sometime later when there was a lot of
6.5 Creedmoor.
6.5 Creedmoor. So when there was a lot of interest in 6.5 Creedmoor, but it was 10 years later. And when we first engaged with them, they were, great company, great team of people. Worked with them to, do the unthinkable. Why would you make a semi-automatic 6.5 Creedmoor rifle that was really after long-range match shooting? And it's a good projectile. Much like at that time we also were chambered in 260 Remington, which is also 6.5.
7mm 08.
7mm. We had a lot of really good.
243.
243. We have a number of barrels.
338 Federal.
338 Federal. Some of them didn't gain in popularity like the others, but it's back to what we talked about. It gave us the capability to have a drop-in barrel with 60 seconds. You can move from one caliber to the next, or a different barrel length depending on what your requirement is. So it's been a very good platform in that what we call the larger frame gun can accommodate a lot of those good cartridges.
One of the things that really amazed me about your specific 308 is I've had the opportunity to work with you as a consultant on several occasions, and I had the opportunity to have some pretty extensive testing with your fully automatic version. I've fired pretty much every full auto 7.62 military rifle that's in use today. I have experience with the original AR-10, and the original AR-10 is a punishing gun to shoot because it's so light. The way it hits back into your shoulder, it drove me back. I've fired some other ones. You have hit some secret soft spot with this one where your cadence, this rifle is fully controllable at 25 yards with a full magazine dump. I'm literally able to put 20 rounds into a relatively small spot at a target at 25 yards and not have a sore shoulder. How did you turn this rifle that would normally be very punishing to shoot and very inaccurate because of its muzzle recoil to something that was so controllable?
Yeah, I think much of the credit goes to the basic design of the weapon system. The barrel's in line with the stock, so that drives the energy into your big part of your frame, so that helps controllability. The other part of it is a bit of serendipity where our gas hole placement is done, the time that it takes for the gun to cycle, and where the auto sear is tripped in the process, so that you're not trying to overrun the gun. So it has just a nice cadence to it.
We will see some footage of that being shot as well.
All right, we're good to go.
Okay, the first one is the Silver State Armory. Range is hot. Silver State again. Next is Lake City Ball. Lake City as well. That's it. So just like your MRP system, we go from Mill Standard 1913 rail to the LM8.
Yes.
And that will be basically for similar reasons
Yeah.
that we talked about before, with making it narrower.
Mm-hmm.
And again, chrome-plated bolts. The sights on there are also your own sights.
Right.
I know the initial British rifles used Knight's sights.
Yep.
And now you're making your own,
Yep.
which do everything Knight's does and then some.
Yep.
So
it's a very similar design to the German sights off the belt-fed machine guns. So Knight's has a great set of sights as well.
well, one of the things about your company, you're actually a manufacturer. You're not, an assembler. So a lot of these components you're actually made in-house, correct?
Yeah, we make everything in-house except for the springs and the small type screws. It's not an economic viable model for us to buy a spring machine and run it for.
This is also
3
what credits
weeks.
your reliability and durability, because you have control over every single part.
Yes.
You have your own drawings, so you know where your tolerances are. So everything fits together. It's all within tolerance.
Yeah.
Which many manufacturers who don't make their own parts, they're just taking parts and putting them together and hoping they, the parts fit together right.
Right. That's really not the way we wanted to operate, and it's really hard to pass your interchangeability test when you're in the middle of a down select and you take your 10 rifles and take all the parts from each one and then have to mix and match and put them all together. So having that control over the actual design and integrity of the parts is critical to be successful in that market.
The rifle we have here would represent your most current, latest, and greatest, would it not?
Yes. Yep. Got the Ambi selector or Ambi. Yep. Or Ambi
So,
Ambi.
as we see from the one on the right, this is the original lower receiver, which had an ambidextrous safety and magazine release, but it did not have the bolt catch.
Correct.
This is the new Mars lower, but it's in the 7.62. So the upper receiver is now, we're going back to M-LOK, so we're now standardized.
Right.
And there's something else on here I want to talk about as well, is the sound suppressor. LMT had gone into the design of suppressors as well. Can you give us a little bit of information about that?
Yeah. So much like the needs that we talked about earlier, voice of the customer. There was a time where there's several very good sound suppressor companies out there, and there were some just fundamental things that the operating community wanted, which was they wanted to reduce blowback. As you would work the can and do training, you would have a lot of blowback into your face, as well as the contamination in the mechanism itself to continue to clean. And then the other issues were increased cyclic rate. So as you would put your sound suppressor on your rifle, cyclic rate could go from 700 rounds per minute to 925 to 950. And it would punish the internal parts, as well as there were some controllability issues and great benefits as far as suppressing the flash and the sound, but at the compromise of being able to control the rifle itself and the gas and the runaway cycle. So we embarked on that process to develop a sound suppressor that would check the box to have a lightweight, reasonably length, no blowback, reduced cyclic rate product. And it was a little harder than we thought, to be candid, and we started out working with belt-fed machine guns because that's what the customers had wanted us to do. And we learned a lot about that. And then with the can that's on there now is more of a commercial variant, so that it's, again, more modular, so that you can use whatever fleet that you have for your fasteners on there.
Well, you also employ or have a consultant, probably one of the most prevalent suppressor designers in the industry, Mr. Doug Olson.
Yep, Doug helped us a lot in that early stage and taught us a lot, and then from there it just keeps evolving.
Mr. Olson was the one who was responsible for many of Knights Armament's initial suppressors, and he was very, very well known. So that was certainly an excellent resource to call upon.
Yep.
One of the things I really loved about the suppressor, I actually just got this out of NFA quarantine. It came with its own muzzle device, but you were able to place a ASR mount on here, because I have a lot of silencer co-products. I was able to put the mount on here, so all my rifles, which have, they have ASR mounts, I was able to use it on my regular rifles. So the ability to swap out the different mounting adapters was really, really incredible. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to shoot this yet. I just got it a few weeks ago. As we see here, this is an 18-inch barrel. You're offering these in several different barrel lengths, are you not?
Yes. Yep. We have it both in probably the most popular 16-inch, the 18-20, and then the shorter variant is 13.5-inch.
I have a little bit of experience with your 13.5-inch. Probably about 6 years ago, one of the police departments that I worked with, the SWAT team, Rochester Police Department, they were looking at your rifles. They had bought several of them, and it was all said and done. They were doing testing with your 13.5-inch barrels out to 400 yards, and they felt that they could even use your 13.5-inch barrel for all of their DMR uses.
Yeah,
they were going out to 400 yards.
Yeah,
they didn't see much of a difference out to 200-300 yards with that shorter barrel.
Right.
They did their your standard 16-inch barrel.
Yeah,
which is really really interesting, because one doesn't expect to see a short barrel like that perform.
Yeah,
that kind of accuracy.
It's when you get to that 800.
Yes, which is impractical for a police department.
Which is probably not where the LE guys really operate. So I think that's probably the right length barrel for a 7.62 by 51 cartridge or a 308 Winchester cartridge.
Well, now we want to talk about something else that happened really interesting with this. Was you were able to adapt this to external piston as well.
Yep, and that again was driven by the requirement said, right? You have to have an external piston 308 gun and external piston 5.56.
We're going to talk about those requirements in a few minutes, absolutely. But you were also able to adapt this system to be multi-caliber as well as multi-operating system as well.
Yes.
And you offer this in several different calibers as well. So you certainly have probably the most modular 7.62 rifle in the industry as well.
Yeah. And a lot of that work was done with Mike Neff, our vice president of engineering, and my business partner. He and Jim Justel, worked that program very, very hard. And when they came back and said, this is the requirement, we said, yeah, but they don't understand that you want to use an internal piston system. And they said, no, you don't understand. If we don't have a product, we're gonna be in the competition. So that lasted a Philadelphia minute, and off we went to create an external piston-driven 308 product.
Do you expect that to be available commercially?
Yeah, at some point it will be. It's just with the supply chain issues that we have and the ongoing shipments that we're doing with Estonia, we want to make sure that they get their products on time.
Have you done any comparative testing between, say, the same length internal piston versus the same length external piston for accuracy? Have you seen if what type of differences there might be just due to the operating system and inherent accuracy?
I will say that it took an effort to get the external piston system to shoot the requirement that we needed. It's not that it can't do it, and there's a number of manufacturers that do a very good job with external piston systems that shoot well. For us, we uncovered some nuances that we didn't know what we didn't know, and now that we do, that they've been solved. But it wasn't as we're out of our comfort zone, to be honest with you.
Now, I just know from my own work with you and other people that you have had several military contracts with this rifle. This has been very popular for you.
Mm-hmm.
I know New Zealand was one of them. They had a shorter barrel today adopted.
Right.
And even in selective fire as well.
Right.
So, this has been adopted by major militaries now as a DMR type rifle.
Right.
And one of the really things I wanted to ask you is, this is a 20-year-old platform.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think it is that it's taken at least 10 to 12 years for people to finally realize what you had back then, to have its popularity be now what it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I reflect upon it, but I don't have any regrets. And much like, my discussion earlier with the 6.5 platform, we're making 6.5, Creedmoor guns in 10 and 11, and nobody else was even doing that. And the guys at Hornady thought we were a little wacky to take their really nice cartridge and run it through a reciprocating grist mill to do that. And now, many years later, it's a big deal. Right?
The U.S. Army was rebarreling M110s for it.
Right. And so with our platform and the things that we have, we've maintained through that 20 years the type of sales, right, that kept us active and kept us going. The success in the UK in 2009 helped to elevate us up into the limelight. But many times, to be candid, seeing is believing. So until you get behind the gun and shoot it and feel the difference, and then, much like in the British trials that we have, to have a group of people that had been running different guns take the gun and hit and create the kind of capability that they have, starts that momentum, that wave on where we want to go. And many times I think we've talked about it is that the customers that we've serviced with our rifles have had to change their training curriculum to go from rifleman to expert, because in their old programs with the other rifle systems that they had, there was a reasonable bell-shaped curve of expert shooters, riflemen, and when they got the rifle and or their optic and their ammunition, all of a sudden they had experts everywhere. So they've had to toughen up or change their requirements. So that's rewarding as well. But in the end, it's taken time to get where we have, but during that time, it's polished into a better product, and we'll just have to convince one person at a time. How's that?
I convince people every day. I've been talking about these for 20 years. A lot of my viewers, we talk about them all the time, and their biggest question is, how can I get one? You definitely have an incredible following, to say the least. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the rifle we have here is the New Zealand contract rifle. This is actually a New Zealand reference rifle. This is my personal rifle. Which, would you say this would be your first large-scale contract that your company's ever had for these kinds of numbers?
Yeah, there's no question.
And it's interesting because when I first saw it, it really seemed like it was a commercial off-the-shelf version of your rifle. with the main difference being is the addition of the bayonet lug and the Surefire war comp.
Cop. Yep.
One of the interesting things about this system is this is where your Mars lower receiver came from, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we had been working on and notionalizing it, and once that requirement came out, it was okay. Now we need to finish it, right? And so there was a reason, and so to be clear, it has the flared magazine well, ambidextrous controls on both catch and release, and the magazine, and then the gloved entry there for the trigger guard, and then a sling swivel adapter in the back, and then SOCOM buttstock, and again, good old Trigicon optic on top, and the credit really is due to the procurement system in New Zealand, because they took a very good holistic and systematic approach to it, where they created a requirement for ammunition, and they went with Mark 262 ammunition.
Probably the best 5.56 combat cartridge in the world.
Yeah. Yep. So that really adds to the capability of the rifle, and then with a very good universal optic, I mean, they really did a nice job of creating a good system. So it's a 550 meter capable system.
And it was nice they went with a 16-inch barrel too, because I think that's a really good compromise over the 14.5, not only for reliability, but to give you just a little bit extra velocity and terminal performance.
Yeah, and that really stretched them out to be able to actively engage at that 550 meter range.
So we also have a Special Forces version of this rifle as well, which we'll see photographs of, where basically the difference is you go from your MRP CQB to your MRP, and we go from a 16-inch barrel to a 14.5-inch barrel,
Right.
but we have a closed-tine war comp on that one. Can you tell us what's a little bit different about that versus this rifle?
Well, the overall length, of course, is a little shorter, and the special operations groups in New Zealand had, their requirements, and their missions are different than the big army, so they tuned the platform to accommodate their mission profile.
Including your enhanced bolt carrier group.
Yeah, they did go with the enhanced carrier group as well.
So, yeah, so this was this a big transition for LMT for as far as going from, more of a civilian type contractor to a major military manufacturer? Do you see there was a difference in the way you had to do business from making for a major military versus, some of the smaller numbers that you were doing for militaries?
Yeah. So a key function of our growth was during the mid 80s and 90s, almost to 2000s, where we did a tremendous amount of military contracting. So as we didn't make the whole weapons systems, we still operated under those type of requirements. And so that was a good way to get trained to make the whole weapons system. But it was again, changing not the culture of what we had, but increasing it, and then having the patience and the understanding to bring more people on and train people on how we do things.
So you have put out a New Zealand reference rifle, and this rifle, with the exception of some of the markings and it being semi-automatic only, this is the exact rifle.
It is the exact rifle. Same materials, same surface treatments, and that we try to do that for all of our platforms.
I have to say, as I said, I own many of your rifles. This is my favorite of all of them, this particular configuration.
Yeah.
I think this is the ideal combat rifle.
Yeah. If there's several, very good optics out there. I've got a soft spot for the Trigicon on this product because it was the product that came with it in the Genesis, and anytime we can use a 77 grain Sierra bullet in a 5.56 cartridge we
get the best of both worlds.
You
really will get the maximum effectiveness out of this rifle.
Yeah,
that other ammunition will hinder.
Yeah, it's a great combination, and I have to compliment the forces in New Zealand of taking a more systems approach to it.
Now, the rifle we have here is your Estonia reference rifle. And one of the things I find most interesting about this was the requirement. As you know, I've been around government procurements and programs all over the world. I have never had a requirement for external piston for health reasons. I've never heard that before. This was the first time I've ever heard of that.
Right.
What was your thoughts on that?
Again, it's when looking at the different procurements and different contractual obligations and what drives people, you learn from everyone. And what we try to do is take the good points from all of our experience, even on some of the ones where we don't win, and learn from that and see
you
how...
don't win. You don't learn from winning all the time.
Yeah. Well, it'd be nice.
Yes.
Okay. But to your point, again, it was just a different problem.
Yeah, very unique.
Yeah.
And also the fact that they wanted a 14.3 inch barrel versus 14.5, and that was the specific requirement.
Yep. So again, they had done their math with their ammunition and what they wanted it to perform, and so that was the requirement. So.
And this obviously uses a GSL sound suppressor, which would predate the release of your own.
Right. Correct.
Now this also is basically the exact version of this rifle versus the markings and the being selective fire of the original. This also incorporates your new trigger.
Yes. So the requirement that we had for the Estonia tender was a trigger that could be a selector that could be put on safe with the hammer forward. So we call that the Euro trigger. And so we took our normal two-stage trigger that we had and then reinvented that and incorporated that capability. So we have our new style trigger that is also can be a Euro trigger to operate the way we just discussed, or it is also a standard two-stage trigger.
Now, this has been a funny point of contention that people have joked about, is the fact that you have such a high-quality rifle, and they chose holosun optics for it.
Well, it's a package, right?
Yeah, that's what they required.
Yeah, and they did their testing. They were able to put together a list, an appendix of you can use these products with the rifle. So that's what we did.
Another unique thing about this rifle was they made some modifications to the to make the gas valve more efficient to use. But also the infantry rifle you see here only has one setting. But your special forces rifle, which is this same rifle in 12.5 if I recall,
right, that
has a suppressed and unsuppressed setting.
Yep.
But other than that, the rifles are basically identical.
Yes.
The stock, for instance, I've seen some photographs with regular mil-spec stocks as well. So are these delivered with a specific stock or both?
They are. This is the stock that they're issued with.
And then if we see something over there, it's something they added to it.
Yeah, it would be a specialty item that they required.
And they also went with the Manta protectors as well.
Yeah. Yep.
And the last thing, again, we're going to talk about is the 308, which we'll see a photograph of, which, again, was adapted to external piston as per their requirement.
Right, right.
And this was another contract where you beat out the big boys.
Yes.
So what this really has done is really put LMT into the realm of a defense contractor who is able to equip armies rather than just special forces. And this has enabled you to compete in any country, anywhere.
Yes.
In your new facility affords you the room to be able to expand and make those kind of contracts. So we certainly look forward to seeing what you guys do in the later years. Now, the New Zealand contracts in Estonia has really changed your business, going from a company that sells lots of guns, mostly special operations, to being a company now that can equip militaries. So now you're sort of in the realm of business where now you can equip armies, not just special operations. And you contribute a lot of that to your new facility being larger. And
yeah. Yep, we've been again blessed. The move to Iowa has been a great thing for us. It's a good business environment. Gave us the opportunity to have our own digital indoor range now. So when we fire the firearms for accuracy and function and reliability testing, we're able to get a digital signature on many aspects of the gun, and that's really helped us hone the guns up.
I want to talk to you about your new 9mm we've heard a little bit about. Where you can give us a little bit of a quick overview of what...
Again, it's been a purposefully built and designed product, and with supply chain and things that we have, it's been delayed a little while. We're still, it's a product that is coming available. Some of the challenges, like many other things, are supply chain based. So stay tuned. How's that?
I'm very interested in seeing that myself because it's gas operated.
Yeah.
So that's something else that really looks interesting.
Yeah.
Well, in closing, did you ever think that you would be where you're at right now when you look back to when you first started making bolt carriers?
No. I just wanted to create an environment that I would like to work in. Right, that was my initial goal, and then after I got started, I just wanted to make sure I could pay my bills, and then I'm back to that same position now.
Well, Karl, thank you so much for taking your time to come here. I've been wanting to do an interview with you for quite some time. As I said, my people who watch my channel know that I am an LMT fan, always have been, and that comes from watching your company grow from when you had prototypes that I got to handle, right to watching everything that you've done. I've had the privilege of working with you on some contractual work and gotten to meet some of your people and to see the insides of how this stuff works. And of course, we wish you the best, and I can't wait to see what you come up with next.
Well, it's very kind of you to say, but you're a very humble person because you're a tough customer. You're very critical, and I enjoy working with you.
I know what to expect of you. I know what you're capable of, so I don't let nothing go by.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So it's not like giving you an easy one because you have good insight, and you point out some things that we sometimes underlook or undervalue. So I appreciate your help and the feedback that you and your followers give us it's good stuff.
That's
right?
the success of your company is you're doing what your customers ask of you. You're not telling them, "But this is what I'm giving you." You actually, that's what you want. I'm going to give it to you.
Right, if possible.
Yes. Well, I'm within reason, within physics. Within physics.
They are laws. They're not suggestions.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Good. Great.
Thank you.
Yep.